Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to WA Live. My name is Elizabeth Hopkirk, and I'm Assistant Editor at Building Design and also editor of World Architecture 100, the annual guide to the world's biggest architects. I am absolutely delighted to be joined today by Philippa Simpson from the V&A for our keynote interview. Philippa is Director of Design, Estate and Public Programme at the V&A, which was named Client of the Year by Building magazine last year. As you already know, the V&A has worked with big names including Amanda Levitt in South Ken, Kengo Kuma in Dundee, and of course currently O'Donnell and Toomey and Phyllis Castillo in Renfrew on the V&A East, their new museum and collection centre in Stratford. They've also appointed countless smaller practices on more modest and temporary projects. You may have eaten at Reed Watts's cafe in the Sackville Courtyard, visited David Conn's Photography Centre or ZMMA's European galleries. Or perhaps you've been lucky enough to go to Shenzhen in China and see Sam Jacob Studios galleries out there. Meanwhile, Matos Ryan and the AOC are busy working on another live project over in Bethnal Green at the museum. That must keep you pretty busy.
Yes, we are.
You've been at the V&A for 8 years. You studied history of art at the Courtauld in Edinburgh, and you began your career as a curator at Tate, where you took touring exhibitions around the world to the Prado, the Louvre, Mexico, Washington. You described your job as addictive. I think I'm beginning to see why. Just to kick us off, and this may be the hardest question that I'm going to ask you, can you give us one highlight from your time at the V&A?
Oh God, crikey. Okay, one highlight. Yeah, as you say, that is a really tricky question. I think because of the range of stuff that we work on, it's all kind of thrilling. I have reflected on it a bit. I think it's interesting. I think I'm going to do two because that's just the annoying way of answering the question. But the thing that really got me, I think, over the past few years in particular, was the opening of the Raphael Gallery, which was completed during lockdown. So it felt like this absolutely extraordinary, explosion of joy when it was finally open to the public, because we completed in the October of 2020, and so then it was closed for a kind of further nearly 6 months. It's Fielding Clegg Bradley scheme, and it kind of brought together everything that's wonderful here. It was the heritage architecture, a gorgeous environment, just the most sublime experience of walking into the space, the works themselves, shown to their absolute best, and it was fabulous. But there was something connected with that. As we were opening it, we were actually beginning work on an exhibition which starts here quite soon, actually, called Fashioning Masculinities, which we're working on with a brilliant practice led by Jaden Ali. And there was something about the kind of combination of those things coming together. You could not be more different, and both completely spectacular and wonderful in their own right. So I think there was something about that moment which really got me.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, we needed joy in lockdown, didn't we?
Oh,
I think at the V&A you divide projects into capital and temporary, don't you? And they're procured differently. Could you explain a bit more about that, and also just talk us through what you've got coming up?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, our capital projects generally focus on our gallery spaces and visitor facilities, and usually have a sort of lifespan of 10 to 25 years. It ranges depending on the type of build. And the way that we procure those usually is open competition. Depending on the scale, it's ODU competition, or it's a kind of just an open field from which we shortlist usually about 6 practices, and then we go to pitch and tender and sort of run through from there. And that is, it's fully competitive. We do scout around, see who's out there, and sometimes we make approaches and invite people to submit, but largely it's kind of left for people to kind of show their interest. With the temporaries, it's slightly different. We do a lot, so there are lots of competitions running all the time. So that actually is shortlisted, and usually what we'll do is select somewhere between 4 to 6 practices to approach and invite. And with both, though, what I would say is we don't tend to ask for a fully fledged scheme or concept, or what we're really looking for is the team themselves, their approach, their methodology, their philosophy, and to gauge the sort of dynamic between that team and our internal team. So once you kind of get into interview and pitch, the process begins to become more sort of similar. Things coming up, I always have to be very careful at my press department. They get cross with me, to be honest. So I'll have to be a little vague, but as I say, we always have big exhibition tenders coming up. We've got a major fashion show, which is the next one, photography. We've got one show which is led by our Asia department coming up relatively soon as well. So all of these will be kind of by invited tender. And also 2 potential gallery projects coming up this year for competition. So they should be going out as an open call. We also have, of course, our V&A East project in Stratford, and the fit out for the permanent galleries in the museum building in Stratford on the waterfront. They're going out this late summer, autumn time. So they're also kind of coming up. So keep an eye out. There's constantly something. There's always something.
And so how do architects get in on the action? What are you looking for, and how do they attract your attention so that they get on those invited lists?
Well, we're always open to approaches, actually. People always are always slightly kind of cautious about that, because it can seem a little cold, and sometimes you think your letter sort of just kind of got filed away without being looked at. But actually, you know, being invited to meet people in their studios, that's really helpful. Seeing people's environments and the way in which they work, because so much of what we're looking for is about the feel of the team. As I said, we don't tend to, or certainly over the past kind of 3 to 5 years, haven't tended to work with practices who've worked in the museum sector before that much. We are kind of very actively trying to find people who come from different disciplines. We've worked with, I mean, everything from sort of shop and retail designers to actually teams led by graphic designers, theatre, catwalk design, you know, really kind of looking across different fields. And so approaches help. We also kind of scout, you know, it's industry journals, and we keep an eye on what's going on kind of more broadly. So yeah, I mean, there is something about seeing the studio which has been, I think, really fruitful for us, because you get a better sense of sort of how people approach their work than just getting them into the museum, because everybody comes into the museum and loves it in the nicest possible way. You know, there's not a practice that comes in and doesn't fall in love with it. So it's, yeah, it's kind of getting something slightly more personal, I think. Yeah.
You said something interesting when we were chatting the other day about how your rivals, as it were, aren't other museums, but are other sort of entertainment, forms of entertainment. How does that affect what you're looking for when you appoint practices?
Interesting. Well, I suppose it goes back to what I was just saying. Yeah, we try to. Yes, it's a really good point. I think that V&A in particular has sort of led the field here in museum practice, where we sort of understand ourselves not just as a place which showcases research or showcases, you know, objects, but it really is about the holistic experience. And so a lot of what we do is what has commonly been termed immersive, although I am slightly uncomfortable with that phrase, because I think you can be just as immersed looking at a single painting on a wall as you can with kind of every noise, sound, you know, light effect and everything else. But what we've tried to do is something which really acts on all the senses, and we're kind of, I think, scent is the kind of next one for us to crack. It's quite difficult in a museum context to use perfume for various reasons, but you know, we do try to do something which is multi-sensory, which is, you know, often quite emotive. Actually, you know, I think we have a fairly strong belief that, you know, the experience of an exhibition or a work of art, if it's not emotional first, you're actually not going to engage intellectually either. So that really, there is this kind of visceral appeal that we try to get to. So often, you know, what's really important to us for the practice is understanding how they collaborate with different disciplines. I mean, particularly lighting, which is a huge thing for us. So lighting design, also sound, which takes different kind of forms actually, whether that's sort of putting together a soundscape, or whether that's just kind of, you know, how we treat, you know, AV sound in the space. AV itself, filmmaking, all of that kind of stuff. So understanding how people might approach that and how they might bring people in. We tend to more recently have tended to procure each of those more distinctly. Sometimes we ask for a whole team, sometimes we kind of cherry pick, sometimes we half and half, and sometimes we ask for a whole team and then get people to ditch everyone else, which is a horrible situation that sometimes arises, because to be truthful, you know, we want to make sure we get the best of everything. So we try to kind of remain flexible in that way. But that, I think, has really affected how we approached it. And that really is something which is, you know, looking at, you know, which is how we compare ourselves, I guess, to theatre or cinema, or, you know, that it's something which is about the spectacle and the show, and somebody's understanding of that is really important, with objects at its heart, of course.
And related to that, how would you describe the V&A as a client?
Yeah, I reflected on this because we talked about this a little the other day. It's interesting. So we are in some ways very confident as a client, I think, because we do so many projects. We usually go with a really strong sense of what we're about, but not always a completely strong sense of what we want, if that makes sense. So we know who we are, and we know we have this kind of slightly intangible sense of the VNA is, and so we're kind of confident in that regard. But yeah, we try to remain receptive and open. And I hope that anybody that's worked with us would say the same. We really value and place a great value on architectural expertise, on design expertise. And we are not a client who wants somebody to just kind of draw the thing that is in our heads. We really are trying to get somebody who will challenge us, or provoke us, or come with new ideas. That came out really, really strongly. I think actually we did a show a year or two ago on Iran, called Epic Iran. We worked with Gort Scott on that, and they were really great for us because they hadn't worked with the museum before, and so they were approaching it with really fresh thinking. And it's a very complex piece of curatorial work that they were dealing with, but there was a really good iterative sort of dialogue. And it's that, I think, it's the kind of, we're a client that I think enjoy that to and fro, and we're confident enough to do that. We like to think that we're innovative, I think. We want to kind of push the boundaries every time. We don't want to kind of stagnate. We can be quite demanding and difficult. We've got a lot of very complicated stakeholders, curators, conservators, plus all of our trustees. I mean, there's a lot of eyes on this stuff, and people care deeply. So it is, as I was saying, it's quite an emotive environment in some ways. It's work that comes from the heart, as it is with architecture. So you've got two teams there who are totally coming from a point of emotion. It's that can be quite a lot to deal with. And what else would I say? And we're not very rich. I'm honest.
Low bids.
Relatively poor. So constantly, I hate to say it, having to work to really, really tight budgets, and we're very, very we are very kind of strict on that. We have to be, because it's public money. We're very heavily audited. So it's I don't know. I hope we're fun. It's a very interesting place to work, if nothing else. Yeah.
It must be. People are queuing up. I forgot to invite everyone to chip in with questions. So please, I think you'll find a way asking questions in the sort of chat bar, and then I'll put them to Pip. So feel free to fire away. One of our obsessions at Building Design is social value. We've got this Designing Social Value initiative, and so my next question, I guess, is about that. How do social value and equality, diversity feature in your procurement practices?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. In a way, they feature slightly differently, so it's almost two distinct kind of areas, I guess. So taking kind of EDI as the first kind of area, we've recognised actually how kind of narrow we've been in our appointments. I would say it's first thing to kind of recognise, over the past 10-20 years, and that actually we really urgently needed to open up the field, and a lot of that is to do with actually just taking the time to introduce people to the world of the museum, how it works, how what it means to kind of design for these spaces, work in a heritage environment, which is both thrilling and daunting for all of us, for us and for the architectural team. They are complex, interesting, beautiful, difficult spaces, and so I think what we did, and I'm trying to think now when it was the summer of 2020, so again actually mid-lockdown, I reached out to the brilliant Paradigm Network, who have been just fantastic actually in helping us kind of just really kind of start thinking about this as much as anything, and then setting up events where architects were able to come into the museum, we were able to do walk rounds with them, they were able to ask questions about exhibition design and permanent gallery design, but also it's expanded our network of people who are on our radar, so we can kind of tender much more broadly, and just recognise that actually it needs to be a really proactive piece of work to do that. It's not enough just kind of throw it out and hope that people will come to you, because it's the heritage environment is very can feel really impenetrable actually. As we all need to remember that it felt that way to us when we first started working in it. So so that's one side of it, and then obviously internally as well, we have an internal design studio as well, And so it's really important to us as well in terms of our recruitment that we're kind of making strides in trying to diversify the staff base of the V&A, which again, it's an environment which has been traditionally very, very kind of uniform. So there's sort of two parts to that, and I hope that we're sort of making progress there. We're certainly not where we should be, but we are. I think that we're moving in the right direction. I have a brilliant head of design who's working hard on that with me as well. So that's been really fruitful. In terms of social value, which is connected but also distinct, I think what we have done a lot recently is, in appointing practice, ask them to consider how they would introduce sort of co-design, as well as consultation, but co-design into the process, particularly for permanent galleries. It is a little bit different with temporary exhibitions, I'll be honest. It's something both about the timescale of those shows and the nature of them make that slightly more difficult. But with the permanents, absolutely, we've asked people to think about that. And it's been really interesting because different practices approach it differently, but it has in every instance been enormously productive. So the Young V&A that you mentioned in Bethnal Green, it's been running all the way through, working with children, families, schools, the community, and literally every single element. I cannot tell you, huge amount of time spent doing this. And then on the other hand, we've got a photography centre, which Gibson Thornley are working on, the second phase of our photography centre that David Cohn started. And that's been a much more targeted approach, where they've worked with 16 to 24-year-olds on one area of that gallery. But all of this is really significant for us because it's about how we reach out to our audiences, and we introduce both museum practice and architectural practice to them, and they in turn introduce to us, what they want, what they need, what's of interest, what's going to bring them to the museum. So it's seen as a genuinely sort of two-way process. And the same with the contractors, actually. We ask them to put in a social value statement. They're obliged to engage with our communities, particularly in the East End, where it's a very locally rooted museum. And also to kind of explain their approach to apprenticeships and how they recruit their labour. So it's a huge, it's a huge topic. Sorry, I've gone on for ages, but it's very sort of multifaceted for us. And
really interesting. And have there been moments? Can you kind of look back at projects and thought, oh, that really brilliant bit of a project wouldn't have happened if we hadn't engaged in the way that we have with communities or people?
Yes, 100% yes, absolutely, absolutely. There are also bits where you think, oh my goodness, we shouldn't have went down a rabbit hole. I'll be honest. So, and what I think what we've learned so much from the particularly Young V&A was the kind of trailblazer for this for us. So Dematis Ryan and AOC, Agents of Change, both of them brilliant at this, and appointed partly for that reason. And what we learned through that process, and they guided us through, is you do have to be targeted. You can't just be everything's co-designed at every stage, because you just you end up in a massive tangle. But yeah, no, there are. I mean, there are some brilliant elements of both of those projects that I've just mentioned, actually, where one in particular, I'll say let's go to the photography centre there. So we're building this, I probably shouldn't say, so we're building this kind of walk-in camera obscura, for people just to understand how the inside of a camera works, right? Which is, in the nicest possible way, if you know how it works, and if you're a curator of photography, it seems a no-brainer, sort of. But actually understanding that if you're always on a digital camera and you're age 17, you have no idea of that history, and the best way to do it is to physically embody, to actually kind of get them to live it. Fantastic. Came straight out of conversation with them. Absolutely brilliant. So yes, absolutely is the answer.
Oh, fascinating. And the sort of third strand, I suppose, to this section is how does sustainability play a part in your decisions at the moment?
Oh, increasingly, as our kind of gutters overflow and everything starts leaking, that we're very aware of the impact of climate change when we've got big old Victorian buildings to manage. So yeah, I mean, it is really significant, and we're now threading it through everything. So from architectural appointment to contractor and all the way through. It's on all our briefs. We've got our kind of we have a sustainability plan which we issue to everybody that works with us, so they can see what our objectives are, and also our kind of our actual sort of the restrictions within which we have to work, and we ask for a fair degree of detail on that. Actually, it forms part of our criteria for tender. we also internally are beginning a huge kind of process of education ourselves, and that's both in terms of kind of how we procure. It's about the materials that we're using, because temporary exhibitions are about the least sustainable activity in the world, you know. So we are really looking hard now at how we reuse and recycle, and you know what we do with the waste that's coming out of those shows. And we appointed a sustainability lead in March. So it was 2 years ago actually, March 2020, and she's been brilliant at sort of leading the charge on that. But it's really important to us that we need to be knowledgeable, because we need to know, you know, people can tell you whatever, you know, tell you that something's sustainable and brilliant and it's the best material in the world, but unless you actually know it yourself, you can't take that decision. So that's really been important to us.
And are you, I think you slightly covered this, will your next project be a net zero project, or how soon can that be an ambition?
How soon can that be a thing? That's a really good question. It is incredibly difficult in the buildings that we work in the old buildings, to do anything that's net zero, because it's working with heritage structures is complex, and it's kind of there are quite kind of tight parameters around it. What we do try to do on every single project is there is always how to put it, a sustainability improvement that goes with it. So every time we do a gallery, all the lights become LED. We're still not fully LED in the building, so that's something which is kind of an ongoing thing. We improve our environmental management, so we have to keep certain temperatures and humidity in all the galleries for the protection of the collection. And as more and more we're trying to introduce kind of passive control for that. So Bethnal Green has a lot more passive control than it did, you know, when we reopened there. So everything is kind of gearing towards that. And where we can't achieve total net zero, or where it's not possible to do everything we'd like to, we're trying to future-proof for when the technology advances to a degree where we can. So, for example, in Bethnal Green, we're putting in place what we need to have to use when and if we can, an air source heat pump outside, or a ground source heat pump to power it. So it's, you know, we can't do it yet because actually it's not actually, you know, we're not able at this stage to introduce it, but the hope is that, you know, as it advances we can. And then the Stratford buildings, as far as possible, yes, we're trying to build kind of consciously. Again, the kinds of restrictions on the collections mean the buildings never operate, you know, it's very difficult to get them to operate at complete zero. But
on a similar topic, questions coming asking about your choice of products that you use on projects, so the building products. Do you make those decisions in-house, or do you? Sorry, it's a bit of a fuzzy one, isn't it? Do you choose the products in-house, or do you leave those decisions to the architect or the designer to advise you?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. We would ask the architect or the designer, but then it goes through a kind of stringent internal review, is what I would say. So yeah, we would ask them to specify and lead that, I think, largely. Yeah.
Brilliant. Keep your questions coming in, folks. Although we are coming towards the end. The V&A has been a pioneer in the way that it's viewed master planning, its estate as a core activity. You now work with a lot of international institutions, advising them, I think, on sort of how to follow in your footsteps. Can you tell us a bit about what that involves, and what you've learned from the way things work in other countries?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so we do that both formally and informally, actually. So we have a professional development course that we run for our peers and colleagues in other institutions around the world, where they come and learn both about capital and about temporary exhibition kind of design and build, which is great, actually, and always eye-opening. And you kind of think, oh, you're on broadcast because we're the training institution, then of course you get as much out as you put in. But we also do it informally as well. So every time we open a project, 1 million people come visit, and we show them around, and we go and visit other institutions as well, just to kind of keep abreast of what's going on. What have I learned from other institutions? I've learned that I wish that the UK funding scene was easier. Certainly, it's so interesting how different it is abroad. Sorry, it's a terrible thing to talk about, but it's so true. You know, philanthropy in the UK is very different than it is in the US, for example, and government funding here is very different than it is in Europe, you know, where the investment in the cultural sector and the kind of return on investment in the cultural sector is really deeply understood. And here I think we're still kind of, we're still finding our way with that. So it's interesting, the landscape is very, very different. But I think, you know, what you do learn in some ways is the kind of commonality, is that actually there is an alchemy to how you do something brilliantly, and it involves kind of, you know, a moment that happens whether kind of by chance or by design, where you have a very brilliant internal team and you appoint the right architect, and something about the dynamic between those two teams, the right design team in general, actually, you know, can just spark something. And I've seen it. What I find really interesting when you walk around these buildings is you can feel it embedded. I really do believe it, actually. It sounds slightly kind of fluffy, but you can tell if it's been a happy project, I think. And that's why for me it's so important to make sure that everybody that's working on something loves it, is excited by it. Yes, it'll be frustrating, and yet all hate each other at one point or another. But you know, that sort of environment and that atmosphere to a project is so critical. And that, I mean, it sounds like a vague thing to have learned, but it has been really apparent, I think.
Mm. And do you, you said you travel to other institutions as well around the world. Are there particular projects that you would think that would be possible to do over here? Or we'd love to bring some of what they've done over there to London.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, it's constant project envy, really. I kind of want to work on everybody's projects all the time. But yeah, going abroad, we did this brilliant chat. I think, God, who's travelled recently? I mean, I feel like I haven't seen anything for years at the moment. It's so depressing. But the last one that I did before lockdown, we went to Tallinn. We went to Estonia, actually. I went to the National Museum of Estonia, which is just outside in Tartu. And that's a really beautiful building, I think. It sits within its architecture. It's a completely different landscape. It's out in the middle of nowhere. It's on an old airstrip, actually. So it's in a kind of a not quite rural environment, but it's in grasslands, and you know, and it sits beautifully within its landscape. It has a really gorgeous, it's a gorgeous experience to be inside. It's really interesting collections. You know, no project is absolutely perfect. I mean, again, I think it was, you know, it feels like it has a good soul in it, and I think it was, you know, one of those projects where you think you spent wisely, like you made good choices about how you spent, and you did it beautifully, and it feels great, you know. So that was a really interesting one. It's quite envious of that. But you know, oh, and the one, yeah, in Budapest they're doing amazing things. They've got an amazing music centre going up, and that's gorgeous. So I did a walk around it there as well, just before we stopped travelling. And you know, again, just a building of joy. It felt really celebratory, you know, just really sort of really gorgeous. Anyway, there you go. Always, I want to do more.
Brilliant. And institutions like the Louvre are building outposts in the Middle East and other parts of the world. Are we going to have a V&A Dubai, or what's... Can you still
We have the gallery in Shenzhen, as you mentioned, which Sam Jacobs designed, and that in a way was not an experiment, but it was a way of finding, you know, of kind of working out what that would be like, and how that might work. And I think if we could do it meaningfully, I'm sure we would look overseas. At the moment, our attention is fully UK based, I have to say, and sort of getting over the past kind of couple of years and, you know, what's next in the next two. And V&A Dundee has been such a roaring success, actually. So, you know, there's sort of, you know, a lot of attention on there at the moment, thinking about how we absolutely capitalise on that, because it's just the most fabulous place, and, you know, has so much potential. So that's sort of, I think that's where our focus is at the moment, and our touring exhibitions, which are in, you know, 20 different cities across the world at any given moment. So we have a huge international audience through that. And there's something great about that, because what we do is so varied. Actually, that's a really great way to kind of show every element of the collection in lots of different places at once.
Are you finding that more international architects are expressing interest in working for you, or does most of the interest come from homegrown talent?
Oh, I would say it's mainly UK and EU, and if I'm honest, I hate to say it, since Brexit, mainly UK. It has made a difference to us, you know. But yeah, so it's yeah, mainly UK and Europe, but the vast majority, I would say, UK based. Yeah.
And has that really complicated things, the changing landscape of the Brexit? in terms of limiting choices that you might have previously made?
If I'm honest, it really, really has, not only because of travel, but also, yeah, just kind of the difficulty of working across borders. And if I'm honest, more than anything is about getting materials into the country and building the things. You know, that has been a complete nightmare. So, you know, we're still sort of catching up on that almost, and trying to work out how we maintain the pace at which we do things, you know, with this sort of new obstacle, actually, I'm going to be totally honest. So yeah, and it affected our, you know, I mentioned we have an in-house studio, same thing, you know, it's very difficult to attract talent, you know, and a lot of design talent comes from Europe, and yeah, so it has, I think, changed the face of things for us.
Yeah. Are you confident that you'll be, given enough time, you'll be able to find ways around those barriers?
Of course, we always do. Yes, absolutely. And you know what? We're a fully international organisation, and you know, we see ourselves on an international stage. So yeah, I'm sure we will. And I think, you know, we're lucky that we have that kind of profile, and yeah, we'll be able to weather it. It's just kind of getting through. I think it was the kind of perfect storm of everything, just made it such a tangle over the last couple of years, and we're just kind of working through to find out what actually will be normal, I guess, and then how we sort of approach things. But yeah, we'll get there, of course.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, our time is up, but it's been fascinating to talk to you, and I suspect you might get a lot of emails from readers of BD and WA100 after this.
Brilliant. Please do, honestly, always open. That would be a brilliant result if we do.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Okay, thanks. Bye now.